My name is Greg, and I am hosting today and delivering the goods. And so I'm glad you joined me. Really appreciate it because obviously we care a lot about the church at Auxano, and we create all this stuff. And it would be a real bummer if no one was listening. So we really do appreciate when you chime in and give us your feedback and help us. We really feel like we're co-laborers with you because so many of you help us develop the stuff that we use to help you and other churches. And so thanks for whenever you give feedback and suggestions. You know how these webinars work because that's been our world for the last little while. So tune in and pay attention and have a lot of fun, and also know that my friend and our sort of technical host today behind the scenes is Bob, and he does a great job of making sure you have everything afterwards that we talked about. So you'll get notes and all kinds of goodies so that just in case you forgot to take a note down. So again, my name is Greg. I am the Senior Lead Navigator and the guy in charge of generosity at Auxano. And so I know a lot of you know me, but for those of you who don't, I live in the Detroit area. I pastored for a while and consulted for a while and been writing some books lately about generosity and giving in the church. And so it's really one of my passions. And so really appreciate, again, you tuning in to listen to what we're doing today. I hope it's super helpful because, again, that's why we do this. And so a lot of what's going to be discussed today is coming out of my last book that I just published, which is called Creating a Culture of Generosity. And so you're going to get basically the framework of the book today. And again, this book is a field guide, which means it's super practical. So I'll be bummed out if you don't go away from this hour with something to do or discuss with your team at your church that will make a big difference for the next 12 months. And so what I'm kind of promising on today's webinar is stick with me for an hour, and it will change the next 12 months of your church life in the category of discipling people toward generosity or creating a culture of generosity. So yeah, I'm Greg at auxano.com, and anytime you have a question or feedback for me, pretty easy to get a hold of me. And so, yeah, that's me. So I grew up on the East Coast. I grew up just outside of Philadelphia. And we learned when you go visit the ocean, which is about an hour away, that undertow is a big deal. You have to pay attention to it. You have to be careful of it. As a matter of fact, I now live in a place where we vacation at the Great Lakes, and there's even undertow at the Great Lakes. I know you all been, probably connected with this or understand what this is, but it's a current of water below the surface and moving in a different direction from the surface movement. And when I thought of today's webinar, I thought, gosh, I feel like the church is experiencing some things right now where we may even see on the surface that things are okay or even pretty decent when it comes to generosity or even other things in church life. But don't all of us have kind of a feeling that there's another current kind of swirling under that maybe we can't see that could be even a little dangerous to our future if we don't pay attention to it? So I'm calling kind of the problem or challenge we have, I'm calling it the undertow effect in the church in terms of going forward. And of course, if you're around undertow, you know that when you start to, if you're in the water and you start to get kind of swept by it, there are things that you should not do. Number one is don't panic. Number two is don't just paddle quickly or frantically because you're using energy that's exerted in the wrong direction. And then number three, look for help. See if you can kind of wave your hand or get help. And so this is kind of what we're doing today, right? Don't panic. Don't spend wasted energy on things that don't matter, and then look for help. And so I'm sure you're being on this webinar today or listening to it on the recording is you saying, hey, I'm willing to listen to this and maybe I can get some help for our church. I mean, kind of the problem statement, if you will, or the challenge is numbers are not headed in the right direction in the church in America, really in any category, but we'll focus today on giving. Even churches that had steady giving or better in the last 18 months know that the complexity of funding ministry is increasing by the day. Why? Well, you know why. Number one, just the world's kind of crazy, but also number two, it feels like the people that are joining the church after the generations, like maybe mine and yours, and I don't know who was all on this call today, but if you're older than 40, you have a different regard for generosity and giving to the church than those who are younger than 40. And by the way, I'm not blaming it on younger people. I'm just saying there's a reality here that people don't tend to give in the manner that we can presume or kind of bank on like they did in years past. And so the complexity is increasing. I think, and this is really what we're talking about today, the solution to that complexity is intentionality. By the way, I would say probably intentionality and agility, meaning we want to have a written plan to shift the culture of our church toward making generosity normal. But we also want to have some agility too, that will kind of make sure that the things that we're doing, we can quickly pivot if they're not working. What we say about how to handle or create a culture of generosity is you want to literally come up with a set or a list of actions in keeping with the church's theology and respecting the church's calendar. What do I mean by that? I think every church needs to wrestle down with their senior leadership, especially, what do we actually believe about the category of giving or finances or generosity or wealth? I actually ask churches to kind of do some homework in that, just to make sure that they're all on the same page before they start taking actions that are in line with their theology. One of the things I say when I'm coaching churches is, it's not my job to decide what you believe theologically about generosity. I have opinions, of course, and I have things that I think are rooted in scripture, but really it's up to you and your team to decide what is at our church, what are the things that we believe about generosity. And then, of course, respecting the church's calendar, meaning we want to be able to do things that are not too much, not too little, not too fast, not too slow. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So just to recap why we're doing this today, I think giving is getting complex. I think the challenges, the numbers are not going in the right direction. I think the solution is intentionality with a little sprinkle of agility. So let's talk about what I mean by that. The features of what we're about to talk about are clarity, proactivity or intentionality, ownership by more than just the senior pastor, discipleship of the people, excitement because it works, and then transparency, that we are showing our hands. We are not hiding anything, and we build trust around money, generosity, and wealth because we are fully transparent. So these are some of the kind of the benefits of doing what we're about to do. And that is, we're going to get all these things out of it, or at least Lord willing, there'll be more clarity, there'll be more proactivity, ownership, discipleship, excitement, and transparency. So that's why I start with these waves. You saw the waves at the kind of the theme of this, that the 5 waves are categories or concepts that I think each church needs to wrestle down or discuss or decide something about. And the first of those 5 waves on the road to creating a culture of generosity is to renew your conviction. Like, what do we really believe about generosity? By the way, you know that all along the way, you can pop a note in the chat box, either a question for me or a resource that maybe you'd like to have from our team. And Bob, again, my colleague, is helping me out with today, and he'll be sure to make sure that we serve you well, either right here on this webinar or we'll follow up with you. And so be sure to let us know if you have a question. So wave number 1 of 5 is theology. And what I say is you need to renew or refresh your conviction about what you believe. For instance, one of the things I'll do with senior teams is just sit down with a cup of coffee around a conference table and ask the question, why was one of Jesus' favorite topics one of the church's least favorite? Like, why? Are we missing something? Or is there something to learn in the gap between why Jesus was always talking about it and we're trying to avoid it at all costs? I have some opinions about that. I think it's because there's been some scars on the church and some intimidation factor on the part of those of us who lead churches, probably 10 other reasons. But the point of it is, if it's really important to Jesus, then I think it should be really important to us. And so I always start the theological discussion there. But then we actually ask the question, how could a deeper commitment to giving, literal financial giving, catalyze a spiritual revival in our church? Like, what do we believe is so important about this category of discipleship? Or maybe even said, do we believe that there's something important about this category of discipleship, meaning the giving category, that could actually cause people to find new life in Christ in terms of kind of laying down some of their idols, reprioritizing the way they spend God's resources? I mean, you get it because you are church leaders, but I used to feel the same way, that the money topic was kind of one of those, do we have to? Sometimes I say pastors do it like eating their vegetables, right? They do it because they have to, but not because they want to. But I discovered personally and pastorally that, man, this can catalyze extraordinary growth because it's the thing that's hanging everybody up anyway. But you got to believe that. You got to believe that it's important. And what we say is, let's write a list of kind of we believe statements about, again, giving, generosity, stewardship, finances, wealth, debt, all those things that are related to money and scripture. Second thing, so we're going to rip right through these because you're smart folks, and I figure you can take these kind of highlights and put them into practice. Second one is discipleship. What we basically say is no one goes from 0 to 100 miles an hour in generosity, but sometimes in the church, we presume they do. So we have to create a pathway to disciple people toward generosity. And my opinion on this one is that it can't be binary. It can't be just either you're generous or you're not generous, or you're tithing or you're not tithing. You know, whatever it is in your theological neck of the woods, what can you do to create kind of steps along the way so that just like in any other category of discipleship, we have a way to say, come with me and let me show you a pathway. So when it comes to this kind of life, we start off the conversation and basically, y'all on this call right now, in this webinar, I'm feeding you a lot of our process. So when we get hired to come in and work with churches, I mean, I'm literally walking you through what we do with senior leadership teams of churches. We go through the waves and then we end up with a plan. Remember, we started off by saying that the solution is intentionality and intentionality is having a plan. Well, what we say is you're not ready to write out your plan until you go through these 5 waves. So the second wave is discipleship. And we say, hey, let's talk about what are we aiming at? What's the end goal? What would we love to see in a man or woman, boy or girl at our church in terms of answering the question, what is characteristic of a person that is generous? What do they do? What do they say? What do they feel? How do they act? What are their attitudes and postures? And we literally like whiteboard this out and say, kind of, what are we aiming at? And then we do a diagnosis of the church to say, well, right now we have people that are at various levels in their development and maturing in generosity. And what I find, again, is not binary, like there's either generous people or not generous people, but in fact, there are usually 4 or 5 categories that we want to identify and press into. For instance, one of the ones we'll press into as a team is, let's talk about people that are coming to our church that are not giving financially yet. Let's just describe them. Like, who are they, or who could they be? And not specifically people, but like we create kind of a persona and say, if any person is coming to our church and they're not yet giving, let's talk about that. Where are they at? And we put up words on the board, like maybe they're skeptical, or maybe they got hurt at a church before, or maybe they're in financial trouble, or, you know, when you start to kind of identify these 5 levels, what you realize is at each one of these levels, either someone who's not giving, or someone who is giving inconsistently, or someone who maybe is giving consistently but underdeveloped in the amount they give, right? When you press into this, you can actually then come up with actions for each one of these sort of levels or categories and really guide people, take them by the hand, say to them, okay, if you're here in your spiritual life around giving, what if you went here and let us show you what that means or how to do that? As a matter of fact, the schematic or the discussion starter for all of this, and this is proprietary to Auxano, so there are other groups that do this kind of stuff, but we created this at Auxano, and it's kind of the starting construct, right? The starting construct, no matter what whether you do 4 levels or 5 levels at your church, whether you name them clever names or alliterated or whatever, we always at least start with this and say, look, probably at every church, there's some category of people that are not yet giving, some category of people that are occasionally giving, some amount of your people that are regularly giving, some amount that are tithing, like 10% of income and beyond, and then some that are advanced and they're creating legacies and they're doing non-cash gifts and they really have the gift of giving and they're practicing it. So I always start the discussion here with a church and say, okay, let's talk about this. Is this how you would describe your church? Or if not, how would you describe it? Would you do 4 categories instead of 5? Or would you call them something different? Like I have a church that I worked with that called them pre-givers, proactive givers, percentage givers, partner givers, and so on. So they made P's right out of this. All this is a way for us to articulate the pathway, because we believe discipling people and taking them by the hand is the way to create a culture of generosity, not just expecting people to give based on kind of a binary code, right? So you'll notice these are some of the actual stuff that I've been working on like lately with churches, where like in the one case on the left there, they created not, again, the names, not the names of the previous slide where we just used that as a discussion starter, but then they pressed in and they said, okay, we're going to call these categories for us sacrificial giver, obedient giver, thoughtful giver, joyful giver. Really cool, right? But here's the one I mentioned before: pre-giver, periodic giver, proactive giver. That's the blue one right there. And then let me just tell you this real quick, because I got to move on to the next pathway, but this is part of the secret sauce. People can identify where they're at on like those levels there, the level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You just ask them to self-identify. So you're not picking on anybody. It's super gracious, but you ask them to self-identify at the levels that you've created at your church to teach about generosity. And then you ask them to pray about taking another step, taking their next step. So I wanted to show you the juxtaposition of the level thing there, and then the actual commitment that those people made. They made their next move. Do you see it down there in the bottom corner? Like everyone in the church was asked to make and pray about a next move. And so it gets super tactical in terms of taking people by the hand and saying, hey, it's okay, everybody's at a different spot, but what if we all took a next step? Okay, so that was wave 2. So wave 1, theology; wave 2, discipleship pathway; wave 3, follow a plan. Like this is the actual strategic thing that covers a lot more than just kind of getting people to grow in their generosity. This is like, if you're going to create a culture, you need to have a plan or a strategy. And so for this, it covers a lot of territory. And if you look in my book, it's everything from budgeting to policies to all the things that kind of are the nuts and bolts, the nerdy stuff of church life around money, right? And so we want to look at data. We have a partnership with Mortarstone where we help you look at your data, kind of your analytics, like how are people giving, how many people are giving, who has lapsed in their giving, who has accelerated in their giving, what can we study or know about the ages of givers? Because again, in every congregation, not only are there 5 levels of giving in my estimation, but there's often 5 different generations of people in one church. So talk about complexity. You have spiritual age and you have chronological age, both of which impact our ability to communicate clearly with someone about their next step in the journey. So I love the complexity, but it's not that easy for church leadership. And so that's why you got to have a plan. And so you'll notice that it gets very tactical here. Not only do we look at data, and there's a bunch of other stuff that we talk about, but then we literally ask the question, okay, now that we know kind of where we're at, what could we do and add to our calendar for the next ministry season? However you do your calendaring, right? So if you do a 12-month calendar, what I'm saying to you is part of creating a culture of generosity is actually dropping things into that calendar now so that you are not reactive, sort of the oh crap moment in a church where you say, oh crap, we're behind budget or we need more money or whatever, but we're proactive. We say, look, we talk about generosity around here all the time, not just when the church is behind budget, because here's the problem with that. We unintentionally communicate by talking about being quote unquote behind budget, that giving is just about the church and its financial functionality. Jesus doesn't allow us to talk about giving only as a way to quote unquote keep the church running. Because even if you had all the money you needed in the world, pastor or senior leader, you still have to disciple people in giving, because that's what Jesus did. And that's what's so important to me in my spiritual life, is that, pastor, you help me with one of the categories of my life that's the most stressful. So I say, what are you going to add to the calendar that's either a teaching series or it's a budget class or it's a report on how things are going with money at the church? Like, we encourage people to regularly create impact reports where it's not just a P&L sheet, but it's literally, here's where the money's going. So it demonstrates transparency, intentionality, and lots of other things. But strategy for us is the nuts and bolts. It's the nerdy stuff. It's how do you get it baked into the church so that we just don't have a once a year eat your vegetables kind of thing. Okay, communication, big deal, right? How can we teach the importance of generosity? And this isn't just the preachers. This is the team that does anything related to communicating the values and vision of the church, like your media team, your social media team, the people that create the print matter that gets handed out. Maybe you still do that at your church and you hand something out. So everyone needs to be kind of on board with what is the best and most effective way to lovingly communicate about generosity so that it doesn't look like P&L sheets, but it actually looks like discipleship and care for the vision of the church. One of the things I suggest to every church I go to these days is ask an under 30 years old person to evaluate your digital giving, or for that matter, any aspect of your church life. Because I think those of us, I'm 52 years old, I'm constantly surveying under 30 men and women to find out what they're thinking about the church life, giving, and more, discipleship, you name it. It is eye-opening and it's extraordinarily helpful. So what I say is, as you're creating your GDP or your generosity discipleship plan, which is a 12-month intentional proactive strategy, you better bend the ear of some people that are 25 years old, because it will help you extraordinarily not be sort of unidimensional or monodimensional or directional in your communication. I can't talk to only people that are just like me, that grew up in the church and are in their 50s or 60s. Like, that's a segment for sure, but that's not the only segment. And so ask some other people. And then, the other question is, how can we more effectively tie generosity to kingdom impact? Like, this is one of the things I'm hearing from young people, especially, but not just young people, you and I too. How do we know that as we're continuing to invest, not only are we doing that out of faithfulness to Christ, but that we also get to see the fruit of some of that? And what I find in the churches that I travel to, very few churches have a proactive plan for reporting on impact. Oh, some of them have like a year-end report or a year-end sort of study that they do. But I think it needs to be regular. And let me tell you why. The nonprofits, both Christian and non-Christian nonprofits that exist in the world, know that if they don't report on impact, they will have a hard time getting people to engage with their mission. Somehow the church thinks they're exempt from that, and I don't think we are. I think we got to do a much better job of tying money to mission, tying giving to impact, and being able to celebrate with people. Like, not only are we grateful that you're developing the generosity in your Christian life, but also, guess what happens as we all do this and kind of pull these resources together and use them for mission here and around the world? Guess what we get to see? And that kind of is almost that sort of emotional product that, again, we don't deserve that. We need to be faithful without seeing those things. But more and more, I think those things are helpful and impactful to the congregation. Okay, wave 5 for me is kind of like, here, how do we integrate it? So it's integration. Now, what do I mean by integration? Integration is the time when you look out across your data, your people, your calendar, all these things, and you have your plan, your generosity discipleship plan, your GDP, and you say, okay, how are we going to do it? How much is too much too fast? Versus what's the right pace to start to include more things proactively in the life of our church so that we have an opportunity to create a culture of generosity. Let me just tell you the story. When I hired a guy and we came to senior leadership at our church with a generosity plan, we were fired up and we had a lot of really great ideas. And what happened was, unintentionally, we sort of had too many ideas. And it felt like all of a sudden the church was just about generosity, not even about begging for money, but literally discipling people toward generosity, when there's a lot of other people to disciple. There's a lot of other things to disciple people about. And so it looked a little bit overloaded on generosity. So I just suggest to you, as a guy who made a mistake, even though you have lots of ideas, be mindful of what kind of a pace would be best when you're integrating some of these generosity practices into the life of your church, particularly the forward-facing ones. Like you may have a bunch of stuff that you have to do that's kind of behind the scenes or policy or software, all that kind of stuff. That's fine. You can do that as quick as you want. But when it comes to kind of the forward facing stuff with a congregation, make sure that it has a measured pace to it so that it doesn't overwhelm the church calendar or the people. So I ask again, senior leadership teams, when I'm in session with them, what will it take to soak something new into the fabric of church life? And who needs to be on board with this? In other words, I highly suggest that if you're the senior leader at your church or one of them, that you don't just make an announcement one day that we're going to have a bunch of generosity stuff going on from now on. I think there needs to be a lot of sort of friend making and internal relationship building and co-laboring or collaborating with your people so that they understand why you're ramping up the discipleship of generosity, how you're doing it, what you believe and why it's theologically a conviction of yours. I mean, there's a lot of sort of soaking that needs to happen. And it's not just one day we flip a light switch on and say, this church is all about generosity now. I think it needs to be, again, measured in terms of integrating it. And this is one of my most exciting questions that I get to ask when I'm kind of working with church leadership. What would an increase in the culture of generosity mean for your church's mission beyond just paying the bills? I think it's time for some dreaming again. I think people are tired. They're kind of nervous. They're exhausted because of the last 18 months. And I think it's time, with whatever energy you have, senior leader, to just try to pop some dreams back into what's going on, and be able to say, hey, folks, we're not slowing down. We're trying to be caring and careful about the fact that a lot of people are hurting in our congregation. And so we don't want to blow past the hurting with our strategic initiatives. But at the same time, gosh, I love having the whiteboard conversation that says, hey, if everybody took a next step, the non-giver, the sporadic giver, the good giver, whatever, if everybody said, Lord, what do you want me to do in the category of generosity in my following of you at my church, and the church had an infusion of quote unquote extra funds, what would you do with it? What would you do with it? That's the dream. And how could you serve your community or the world? Most of the churches that we work with will see 15, 20. I have colleagues that have recently seen a 30% increase in giving just because they carefully created a generosity discipleship plan. The senior leadership of the church was not a bully about it, but they gradually infused it into the life of the church. They walked people on a pathway so that it wasn't jarring or jumping them from 0 to 100 miles per hour. And over even the first year, the increases were great. But beyond just the financial increases is the idea that people are literally being more intentional in their relationship with Christ in the category of what becomes an idol for most of us, and that is the use of money. So I went flying through that, but I hope you understand that we tried to break it down so that you can do this. Like, you can have this conversation with your team. If you want us to guide you in that, that's obviously we'd love to do that. It's what we do for a living. But those 5 waves are the critical things that need to be, again, addressed, discussed, decided, so that our churches, when we're done with them, usually have a multiple page packet, if you will, that is their GDP, their generosity discipleship plan, which says our theology, here's what we believe. Our discipleship, here's how we're going to disciple people. Our strategy, here's the nuts and bolts, nerdy stuff of how we run money at the church. Our communication, here's how we do classes and sermons and all that kind of stuff. And then fifthly, here's how we integrate it into the calendar of the church, being mindful of the various constituencies of people who are hearing our messaging. So we believe that if you go through these 5 and take some time to really sit down in it with the men and women that help you lead the church, you'll end up coming up with a plan that you run basically for a year, and then you evaluate. Of course, you evaluate all along the way, but we do a formal evaluation after the 12-month plan runs and says, okay, did our GDP work? And let's look at all the things that we were hoping that it would do. And if there's aspects of it that work, great. If there's ones that don't work, we'll change them. But the idea is intentionality. So I know you're hearing that from me, but most churches sit back sort of flat-footed and say, I don't know, the people just aren't giving. And I've told them that from the pulpit, a million times. And what I'm saying is it's a little bit more complex than that these days, senior leaders. We need to come up with a plan that is really biased toward relational ministry, not biased toward pulpit ministry. I'm not down on pulpit ministry. I am one of those guys. I'm just saying we've got to widen this and increase kind of the bandwidth of how we approach generosity. Okay, I'm going to pause and give you a few more things that are maybe housekeeping, because I'd love to talk to any or all of you. You see my email right there. If we have any questions in the chat box, Bob will help me with that. If you have any questions you don't want to ask today in the chat box, that you want to email me at greg@auxano, that's fine too. Yeah, any questions, Robert?
Greg, one question. Is your book available in ebook format?
Yeah, you know what? I don't think it is yet, but I'll take that as a
It is not that I'm aware of, but I am going to drop a quick Amazon link in the chat, and it's only hard copy is $9.99. So I mean, what can I say?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We dropped the hard copy price so that it's very accessible. There's no reason not to get it. But yeah, I wish I had a better answer to the ebook thing, because whoever's asking is probably an ebook fanatic, and yikes, can't help you on that one today. Anything else from this group?
There are no other questions. Ed has given you a big high five there, and I would echo what he says. He says, I love your passion for what you're doing and have found your book a fantastic resource. And again, thank you, Ed, for that. And I've been involved with the book since its publication and promotion, and I couldn't agree more. This is an amazing tool for the church. So if participants haven't made themselves available to that, I would encourage them to do that, and drop Greg an email. He'd love to have a conversation with you about what's going on in your world in generosity.
That's right. So let's just wrap up real quick here. Couple of commercials. Of course, Auxano's generosity team is not just me. It's 4 other guys. And so obviously any or all of us would be happy to help you. I'm also partnering with Mortarstone in November, on November 18th. You're going to see some ad stuff come out about this. But for any of you who are interested in a gift planning ministry, there's a panel of 4 of us that are going to talk about not just this stuff, like what I just did for you today is a minor part of that day. But in Atlanta, Georgia, on November 18th at Peachtree Church, we're going to do a gift planning thing with some experts in church legacy giving. And by the way, my little commercial for that is 4 out of the top 5 ways to do gift planning don't require that someone passes away. So when I was the pastor, I always used to think, I'm not doing gift planning. That means people got to die. But 4 of the top 5 ways that you do gift, sort of planned giving, are giving while you're living, and they're extraordinarily helpful for churches and for donors and things like that. So I'm on a learning curve with it, and I'm learning a ton these days, but I've partnered with Mortarstone and with my buddy Sean Riley at Peachtree Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and we're going to do it's just a one-day deal. So if you can get to Atlanta, maybe you live near there, or maybe you're willing to come into Atlanta for a day or two. So that's November 18th. Other than that, Greg, yes, Bob.
A couple of questions have come up. First of all, more information about what you just were talking about is coming in the follow-up resources later. So you'll get that. Also, a great question from Kim. Are there sample generosity plans in your book?
Yeah, there's one, at least one. Maybe there's a couple, but that's actually one of the aspects of the book that I'm going to update in the 2nd edition. Is as we keep doing these GDPs with people, we're going to try to give more samples. So so there is some good stuff in the appendix. But again, if you want help, just email me and we'll give you whatever we got in terms of what other churches are doing. So I guess the short answer is yes, there's one in the appendix.
One more question from Jeff. It's a great one. And he asked, in a small church, would it be wise to first go through this process with the church leaders, elders first, before branching out in the congregation?
Absolutely, Jeff. Yeah. So first of all, awesome question. And I would say too, the size of the church will dictate the complexity of the GDP. So, I mean, there's some churches where the amount of stuff that I have in my book will probably choke you. It's just too much stuff, right? But there's definitely things that each church, no matter what the size is, can put as part of their plan. And again, the plan just needs to be intentional and basically more than what we were doing last year, right? So it's, you come up with stuff. But to answer your question specifically, this has to be a concerted effort of leadership, because what I find when I go into churches is, if I just ask one simple question about what the leaders believe about generosity or giving, what you find is that your neighbor next door at the conference table doesn't necessarily believe the same thing you do about the tithe, about, all kinds of different things. Which again, that's not bad. It's just bad if you try to go out with a united front and you find that when you finally sort of unfold this discipleship pathway to your congregation, you've got elders or session members back that don't agree with you. It'd probably be good to find that out ahead of time and make sure that everybody's on the same page. So I'm a big believer in collaborative leadership, especially when there's change. And I'm sure you know that's part of change management, but great question.
One last thing, Greg, and I love this follow-up question from Kim, a leader after my own heart. So you mentioned a second edition coming out. Well, the question is, when is the second edition going to be released? on the spot, buddy.
Kim, I love it. Of course, my answer is I don't know, because I'm not as organized as Bob is. But I do know that there's already some things that we've edited, even in the book that currently is available on Amazon. So we're kind of tweaking it right now as it goes. So you may even, gosh, I don't know how to answer that, other than that I know I got to add some more stuff to the appendix. I don't think
my answer is going to be, my answer is going to be, as soon as Greg gets it done, we will let everyone who's been on this webinar and our tribe of generosity leaders from Auxano know about it. As soon as it gets done, you're going to know about it. And then I've already made a note on my to-do list. Remind Greg that the revisions need to be completed. So there we go.
Kim, you're killing me. You're killing me. Let me just tell you this. The revisions have to do more with adding goodies to the appendix, not the chapters. And so get it now and use the first edition, and then we'll add more goodies to you later, or we'll just email them to you. But Bob's better at this than me. He's right. We'll get it done.
That's it, Greg. You can wrap up, and why don't you say a prayer for all leaders as we're wrapping up today and heading into the weekend, and then we'll be out.
I love it. All right, Lord, thank you so much for your goodness in our lives, for your generosity in Christ, who died for us and makes our lives meaningful and have worth. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for all you provided for these leaders. I know many of my friends who are leading churches are tired these days. Give them an extra dose of energy. And just thank you for the opportunity to hang with these folks this morning. We pray all this.